Hello and welcome to the Recruit Rockstars podcast, where we focus on the people part of your venture capital and your private equity-backed company. I'm your host, Jeff Hyman. Every Tuesday and Thursday, I interview a world-class expert on talent and recruiting so that you can build a company filled with rock stars. And I'm especially excited today for today's guest. Let me tell you why. You know, if you're a regular listener of the show, you know that I've had my fair share of venture capitalists on the show, and that's great. They lend an amazing perspective across portfolio companies. What would you say if I could bring to you a VC investor, one of the biggest VC investors, who focuses specifically on investing in companies that are defining and changing the future of how we actually work, how you actually are going to work with your team and lead them to success? It's a bit meta, I guess, but that's what I'm doing today. Roy Bahat is the head of Bloomberg Beta. Now, Bloomberg Beta is a venture fund based in both San Francisco and New York, a couple $100 million under management, backed primarily by Bloomberg itself. And they invest in these companies that are literally defining or redefining the future of work. He knows a thing or two because he actually built companies prior to this. He was the president of IGN Entertainment, knows a thing or two about video gaming and content. So we're going to talk about that too. Welcome to the show, Roy. How are you?
Thank you for having me. It's great. I appreciate the introduction. I should bring you around more often.
Good. I've really been looking forward to it because, like I said, hopefully you're seeing the future and you're going to share with our listeners how they need to think about leading and hiring and building their teams over time. But before we get to that, maybe just give us 60 seconds on Bloomberg Beta itself.
Sure. You said it exactly right. We're a venture capital fund backed by Bloomberg. We focus exclusively on investing in the future of work, and that's been our sole focus since the day we started about 7 years ago. And our vision is that the way we work should be more productive and more humane, and that startups are one essential piece of changing that, both by providing tools to help people work better and just by role modeling different ways of doing things. And so that's the kind of founder we seek to back, is somebody who wants to bring that vision to life.
Got it. I understand. And you must have, like, how many portfolio companies?
Oh, I mean, it's always hard to say by giving the total number, because some of them we have a modest investment in, but we have a few dozen that we've got an active material interest in at any given time.
Got it. That'll do. So I got productive or efficient. I get that. What did you mean when you said humane? I think you said more humane.
Yeah. What I mean is that if you think about how your personal life has transformed over the last, let's say 10 or 20 years, and especially focus on technology. Yeah, there are things that are easier to do. It's a lot easier to share a photo, but there's a sense of delight that many of us have when we are able to get a friend a gift that we hadn't thought of out of the blue, or see a message from somebody who we've been thinking about. And that enables us to show up as people. And at work, we have had, especially in the West, for so many decades, this kind of people are widgets philosophy, that you can measure productivity and, starting with time and motion studies. And while that's been great, and I agree with it for the purpose of making sure that we can produce, it hasn't been great for the purpose of showing up as as they say, as a whole person at work, so that you feel like your colleagues know you, so that you feel like you have a deep connection to the place that you work at. And our vision of the future is that technology and culture are not just going to change how much we can do, but also change how we do it, so we feel more like ourselves at work.
What is your thinking around how long this change is going to take? Obviously, it's an everlasting type of process, but are we seeing a huge shift now, or is it going to happen in the next 3 years is that going to prove to be nothing compared to what we're seeing now? Or what are you thinking?
Great question. I think we haven't seen anything yet. I think big picture that we are in a place where the changes have only just begun. I mean, if you think about the tools you use during the workday, chances are, with the exception of something like Slack, and maybe using some personal social media for work, chances are that you are basically using the exact same tools that you've been using for 15 or 20 years. And what I see is that there's a generation of people who are working, and when I say generation, I don't just mean younger people, I mean a cohort of people of different ages who are bringing to work a different way of doing things. And I think, there's that science fiction line about the future's already here. It's just not evenly distributed.
Right.
So we're already seeing a lot of those changes now, especially in information industries. And one belief that we have is if you look at the way that software developers work, there are a bunch of habits and approaches that I think are going to be more generally widespread. I'll give you an example. Software engineer shows up at a new job, and they often show up with a strong point of view about exactly which tools they want to use, what environment do they want to program in, what kind of computer do they think works best for them. And they're graphics people who show up with their own point of view on how to get their job done. Well, that doesn't happen today to quite the same degree in roles in HR or accounting, but it might. So that's just one example.
Got it.
And I think that's going to change. The thing that is going to take a longer amount of time and is honestly much less predictable is about the unequal ways that technology is affecting different kinds of work. So a lot of times when I read about the future of work, I call what I read about the future of working, quote unquote, for us, because they're really imagining somebody who is in an executive type job,
kind of a white collar
industry company,
white collar, college educated work.
Exactly. And the reality is the vast majority of work is not like that. The majority of people are not have not completed college. And one of the many ways that inequality, I think, is bothersome is that it makes, and awful, is that it makes the difference between how we relate to our own work and technology and how we use it at work really different for different kinds of jobs. I mean, it used to be that if you were the CEO, you might have come up from the factory floor or from working in retail. That's much less likely today. And I think that creates an empathy gap. And I don't know how long it will take to close that gap. I believe we'll need to, and I believe that it will be a process of survival of the fittest, because I think the very best companies will realize that and overcome it. But I think that's hard to predict, and it's going to take time.
Let's transition from kind of your point of view about how work's going to change and the investment fund to the entrepreneurs and business leaders that you work with. You said a couple dozen at least, plus I'm sure many others that you've encountered that you didn't invest in or that you sold.
Sure.
What, Roy, sets apart the leaders of these growth stage companies on the people part of the business?
Yeah.
That enables them to really grow and maximize the enterprise versus those that don't make it?
In my dreams, I could give you a simple secret to answer that question. One thing that if only you did it, it's so addictive to think that there is something like that.
Yeah.
I actually think that with founders, it's a lot like hiring in general, where it's hard to know when you're right, but easy to know when you're wrong. And meaning that there are dozens and dozens of factors that make somebody great at leading teams and building them. If there's one core factor, it's probably just giving a shit. It's probably just a person to whom that's really important. That's really widespread across many founders. But one of the reasons I think leading teams and leading companies is such an amazing vocation is it's so multifaceted. You have the psychological aspect of understanding people. You have the emotional aspect of empathizing. You have the practical aspect of knowing at what level to get involved and how to intervene. And if I'll say maybe if there's a second factor after giving a shit, it's that the very best are continuous learners. They assume they're not that good at it, and they're just constantly trying to get better. They're learning from others. They're examining their own behavior. One of the executives who I've admired for a long time, and now, of course, the whole world admires him too, and has for a long time, is Jeff Bezos. And he tells this great story about the first year at Amazon that he hired people who were more talented and experienced than he was. You know, he had
Right.
a CFO
Right.
who really knew what she was doing, you know, that kind of thing. And how when it came time to do the annual review, he didn't know how to exactly assess their performance. These people all do their jobs better than he did. So he wrote them all thank you letters about all of the things he learned from each of them. And that's an example of the kind of adaptation that that I think can set apart a great leader from one who's just okay.
So how does a leader learn to do that? So, you know,
Yeah.
she or he is a first-time leader, founder, CEO. They're hiring people that are better, smarter, more experienced than themselves. How do you do that?
I think there are two factors. One is you got to come in with a perspective. And what I mean by that is your life before you did whatever you're doing really does matter to how you do things. And that's why, you know, I love when I see founders who have had varied life experiences. It's why we love backing a diverse group of founders in every possible way because they bring their point of view on life, all those interactions. And the second, honestly, is trial and error, is making decisions where if you mess it up, it's not critical and you can go back and fix it. You know,
Right.
you look at all the greatest companies and wow, did they turn over so many members of their team over and over and over and over again. And so sometimes I like to say to CEOs love to obsess over how to hire well and pick the right person. And I tell them if I had to pick, I'd rather be better at firing than hiring because I'd rather be better at correcting the mistakes than at staring into somebody's eyes and knowing what to do.
So that's the first time I've heard that, Roy, and I got to pause you on that one because I think you just blew my mind.
Thank you.
So what you said was it may be more important to be good at firing than hiring. Can we go to the next level
Correct.
on that? Is that because...
Yeah, because it's about correcting mistakes. It's about even the very best people I know at hiring get it wrong, I don't know, a third of the time. And so it's like being a baseball player and, having a high batting average doesn't give you 1,000 batting average. And so you've got to correct those mistakes. I will say within the process of hiring, there are definitely things you can do. I believe we tend to focus too much on assessment, on interviews, and on our ability to sit across from somebody and stare into their eyes and ask them some magic set of questions and know whether they'll do well. I think that's important. But if I had to pick, I think it's much more important to be focused on sourcing, which is something that many hiring managers don't even think about, which is to say, how do I reach out and make sure I have at the top of the funnel in my consideration set the very best possible people I can get? A question I often like to ask managers when they're hiring is, who is the person in the world for whom working for you is the best possible job they could get in their life?
Yeah.
Because we often think about who's best for us, but if you start thinking about who's best for them, it puts you in a mindset of seeking out those people. And that's the set from which you get to choose. You don't want to pick somebody who's reluctantly taking the job. You want to pick somebody who sees it as a potential turning point for them. And so, that's some of how I have a bunch of kind of heretical views on hiring that come out in different ways, but those are some of them.
So I'm guessing once a week, once a month, one of your CEOs comes to you and says, Roy, this executive or this leader or this employee is not performing. I'm pulling my hair out, thinking about firing them. And you say, what are you waiting for? How do you coach people that are hesitant to make a change? And it's pretty obvious why. It's not always fun to do. How do you coach them through it?
I mean, look, it's excruciating to do. I remember the first time I had to fire somebody, it ate at me for months, literally months. And I woke up at 3 a.m. the day that I decided to fire him, just kind of in a panic. And I think that a lot of it gets down to understanding, why is it difficult for you? Well, in my case, it was difficult because I had empathy for the guy.
Yeah.
But really because I felt like a failure for hiring him in the first place. I put all this effort into picking somebody. I built him up to the team. I put him in front of the room. And now I got to eat my words. And it's like, yeah, you got to learn to love the taste of eating your own words if you're going to be successful. And so it's a lot of understanding why people are reluctant. I think we're very fortunate in the technology industry that most times when we let somebody go, they find something else really quick. And a lot of our assumptions as a society about how we think about hiring people come from the one company to town era, where if you let somebody go, you are possibly destroying their life.
You're actually
And
doing
I
them
just
a
think that's
favor
not
by
the case
parting
anymore.
ways.
You can. I mean, again, not in every case. Sometimes it can hurt people, but for sure. I mean, I've had lots of cases where I let somebody go, and a month later, they have a better paying job. You know, and so yes, ideally you're doing something favors. The other thing I really believe is I believe in being extremely generous as far as severance, assuming it's a performance issue and not an ethical issue.
Of course, of course.
You know, but going just above and beyond, because that can also often make it a lot easier.
Yep, got it. Let's shift gears again. There's a few more
Sure.
things I want to cover, and we don't have a
Hit
ton
me.
of time. But when you look at making an investment in a business and you love the category, the space, they've got product market fit, what are the things that you look for on the people side of the business or the leadership?
In terms of what we are looking for when we invest in somebody?
To decide to make your investment, yeah.
Yeah, so we, in the name of learning, we try to be public about these criteria, and in a bit, one of the aspects we think about the future of work is that it's going to be much more transparent. And so if you go to our website, you'll actually see our open source,
which I love. It's on GitHub, and it's fantastic.
Exactly. You can see all the criteria. When it comes to the people, there are a few non-negotiables. Do we trust the person? You know, do we fundamentally believe they can do the job?
Yeah.
Then sometimes that's all we got, and there's some other reason to believe in the business, which is maybe that we love the product. But when we are backing a founder or team of founders because of them, because they're really the reason, they're always part of the reason, but when they're the primary reason, it's because we believe they have some special insight or ability that is going to make them likely to be an outlier, because we're not just trying to invest in good businesses. We're trying to invest in businesses that have a shot to be one of the best companies ever. And a frequent thing that investors talk about, which I think is BS, is they talk about something called founder market fit. They mean, is this founder going to be good at serving this market? And that usually means experience, sort of have they done it before?
Right.
So many of the most successful companies ever, person didn't have any experience. So why on earth would you use that criterion? What we think about, which I do think is maybe more broadly relevant, is something we call founder business model fit, which is to say, if your business model is going to be selling things to an enterprise, well, you better be the type of person who likes showing up and doing that kind of, you know, exploratory conversation with a customer.
Right.
You know, if you're kind of somewhere on the spectrum, that can work just fine for consumer companies, where you're never actually interacting with your customers directly, but it doesn't work fine for enterprise companies.
So how do you do that, Roy? You think about
personality and the business model.
So you think about the competencies of the individual or the leadership team and match that against kind of the critical success factors of the business model to see if there's a match?
Precisely right. And competency, even be giving it too much credit in terms of how we think about it. We think about what almost like their preferences. Certain people are just drawn to doing things a certain way. And one time, you know, I remember sitting there with a founder, and I said, you know, if this company is going to be successful, you're going to have to build a big enterprise sales team. How do you feel about the team, you know, leading a company where one of your biggest and most important teams, the job is like take folks out to steak dinners and talk to them about their lives. Yeah. And you could just see the founder was crestfallen. Yeah. That was going to be your life.
I've worked with tech folks who despise salespeople, and that would be their idea of a nightmare job.
Right. And look, there are definitely companies that have been created without having a traditional sales force. You know, Atlassian is one successful example. But, you know, unless you're going to design your company around your preferences, which as founder, by the way, you're entitled to do, what I don't want is a founder who's going to be unhappy to be leading the kind of company that they believe they should build, because that basically, I think, never works.
Let's go to one last topic before we wrap up. And Roy, and it's probably the most difficult, heart-stopping one, at least for a founder CEO, and that is when the business has outgrown the founder, or perhaps hasn't grown, and the founder is holding it back. You've seen this movie before. What words of wisdom can you share about how to know if I should consider replacing myself or supplementing myself? Should I promote myself to chairman? Should I bring in a co-founder? How do I get my arms around that?
It's a great question. First, as a matter of philosophy, I think founders are in a better position to decide that than investors, because their motivation has so much to do with it. They know better. There's this idea that the investor is going to be more objective because they're on the outside. Maybe that's true for later stage businesses. In early stage businesses, the founder knows. And by the way, sometimes there's no good answer, because if you told me this business is 4 months old, CEO is not quite cutting it, we need to replace him, there's not exactly a liquid market for hiring CEOs to go do that. And I think what I say is this, is if you're the founder and you believe you ought to replace yourself, just the same way as if you called me and said you believe you ought to replace anybody else, you probably already know.
Yeah.
And my job as the investor is to repeat to you the insights that I hear in what you're saying, get you to consider other angles on it, and then ultimately, unless there's some other extenuating factor, which happens, but it's rare, to support you making the decision you think is right, because you're in a better position to decide than I am.
Far better for the leader to make that decision versus having it imposed upon him or her by their board.
That's right. It hardly ever works. Or if it works, it's about salvaging a situation as opposed to about thriving. And with startups, once you're in a salvaging mode, you're probably not really going to do that well anyway. And so you might as well just do what's right for the founder, because if the business isn't going to do that well, who cares?
It may be too late.
Yeah, that's right. Exactly right.
But it takes a lot of intellectual honesty, a lot of EQ to be able to go to your board, your investors, your backers who bet on you and say, I'm no longer the right person. That's a very tough discussion to have.
That's right. Although, honestly, I've seen so many founders who recognize that it goes so much better as a partnership than if they bottle it in. And a good investor will know that that might be on the founder's mind and give them opportunities to bring it up more easily. They make it, in the best business relationships, the best any relationships, nothing comes out of the blue, because everything sort of starts to fester, and you got to make it easy for the person to talk to you about it.
Yep, and let them save face as well.
Exactly. There's no embarrassment in any of this. We're all just trying to do our best to bring new things into the world.
Well, you are doing great new things to bring them into the world, Roy, and I can't thank you enough for making your time. How can people learn more about Bloomberg Beta or get in touch with you?
Well, the easiest way to learn about Bloomberg Beta is read our published operating manual, which is our website, bloombergbeta.com, and you can even suggest changes to it because it's on GitHub, or you'll certainly leave us comments. And for me, if you guess at any digital platform and I'm not at the other end, that's an occupational hazard for me, so please tell me. But I'm probably more active on Twitter than anywhere else, where I'm Roy Bahat.
Great. Roy, thanks again for taking the time.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I really appreciate it, Jeff. Thank you very much.